Find the derivative of x sine y plus y cosine x equals pi over 2. Then evaluate the derivative at the point 0, comma, pi over 2. We have an explicit relation between x and y. It's not solved for y in terms of x, but rather the two are related through this equation. We can therefore find the derivative by taking the derivative of both sides with respect to x, indicated by the prime of both sides. On the left side, the first term is a product rule of x times sine y. The derivative of the first is a 1 times the second left alone, plus the first left alone, x, times the derivative of the second, the derivative of sine, is cosine, leave the inside alone. But then we have to multiply by the derivative of the inside, which is a 1, and y prime. We always get a y prime every time we take the derivative of a y term. Now the second term on the left side is also a product rule. So we will have the derivative of the first, derivative of y is a 1, but we get a y prime every time we take the derivative of a y term, times the second left alone, plus the first left alone times the derivative of the second, the derivative of cosine is negative sine. On the right side we have the derivative of pi over 2, which is a constant, and the derivative of a constant is a 0. So we have sine y plus multiplying, and I bring the 1 and the y prime out front with the x, y prime cosine of y for the second term, plus y prime cosine of x, and then y times a minus sine x will be minus y sine x, all equals to 0. We want to solve for y prime here, and that's done by isolating the y prime terms. We actually have two terms that have y prime. Here they are. They will stay on the left side. Let's move the terms that do not have a y prime over to the other side. So we will have x, y prime cosine y staying, and y prime cosine of x staying on the left side. And we will be moving the y sine x over to the other side. It will become positive, and the sine y over the other side will become negative. We can now factor a y prime out on the left side. Leave the right side the way it is. And now we will divide both sides by the x cosine y plus cosine x to solve for y prime. And there's our derivative y prime. We now want to evaluate this at the point 0, comma, pi over 2. This is the x, this is the y. So our y prime evaluated will be y, which is a pi over 2, sine of x, which is a sine of 0, minus sine of y, which is a pi over 2, divided by x, which is a 0, times the cosine of y, which is a pi over 2, plus the cosine of x, which is a cosine of 0. So we have y prime will equal, we have pi over 2 times the sine of 0, which is a 0, minus the sine of pi over 2, which is a 1, all over 0 times the cosine of pi over 2, which is a 0, plus the cosine of 0, which is a 1. So we have pi over 2 times 0, which is a 0, minus 1, over 0 times 0, which is a 0, plus 1. And we end up with negative 1 over positive 1. And therefore y prime is equal to negative 1.